Hello, my name is Dr. Heather Brown. As Director of Grant Writing and Publications at the University of Missouri-Columbia, I am pleased to welcome you to the 4th Annual Federal Research Update webinar. This event is sponsored by the University of Missouri-Columbia, the National Association of College and University Business Officers, and the Florida High-Tech Corridor Council, an economic development initiative of the State University System of Florida. Thank you all so much for joining us today. If you have any technological problems or concerns or questions during this broadcast, please send an email to federalupdate@missouri.edu. You can use that same email to send any questions you might have for our presenters, and you can send those at any time during the presentation. You don't have to wait for the question and answer session. Go ahead and send those questions to federalupdate@missouri.edu. I am very pleased to introduce our next speakers today. Our next speakers are Emily Linde and Scott Cooper, Grants Policy Analysts with the Division of Grants Policy in the NIH's Office of Policy for Extramural Research Administration. Emily has been with the National Institutes of Health for 13 years. Prior to working in APRA, she was a grants management specialist for the National Cancer Institute, managing the grant programs for the Center for Scientific and Strategic Initiatives and the NCI Construction Program. Prior to joining DGP 3 years ago, Scott was a Grants Policy Officer with the Office of Grants Policy Oversight and Evaluation of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of the Assistant Secretary for Resources and Technology. Turning it over to Scott.
Good afternoon. We're going to be discussing current issues at NIH. We're going to be talking about a number of different topics, and we will not go in depth on many of them. We're going to save time for questions if anybody has any, so we're going to get started. First, we're going to talk about the fiscal year 2013 continuing resolution. We're currently operating under a continuing resolution that's HHS and NIH. And until fiscal year 2013 appropriations are enacted, we're going to issue non-competing research grants at a level below what is indicated on your most recent notice of award. That funding levels will be determined by your awarding institute, and they'll generally be up to 90% of the previously committed level. We have additional information available. You'll see on your screen various guide notices. This particular guide notice is 13-002. Also, the 2012 legislative mandates remain in effect. That includes the salary limitation. Last year, the salary limitation had decreased from executive level 1 to executive level 2, and until the fiscal year 2013 budget is passed, that level will remain the same. We have a frequently asked questions website. You can also see on your screen that's devoted to salary cap questions. We're going to talk briefly about ARRA. We're calling it the end of the era of ARRA. It's about time, I think. Timely quarterly and closeout reports are required for ARRA, and the OMB has issued a memorandum instructing awardees to spend their unspent ARRA awards by the end of September in 2013. OMB issued their memorandum in September of 2011, and it instructed federal agencies to ensure that that money is spent by the end of September 2013. We are able to receive waiver requests from awardees for that September 13th deadline. Those waiver requests are pending HHS and OMB review. Unfortunately, we don't have any additional information regarding those waiver requests at this time. But we do encourage you to accelerate your expenditures and look toward that September 30th, 2013 deadline to have your ARRA awards spent. Next, we're going to briefly talk about financial conflict of interest. As you likely know, in 2011, the financial conflict of interest regulations have been revised, and they're located at 42 CFR Part 50 and Part 94. And the revised final rule was published in August of 2011. The compliance date has passed. That was the end of August, August 24th, 2012. Financial conflict of interest compliance oversight. NIH has undertaken a proactive approach to monitoring compliance with the FCOI regulation. You can obtain and evaluate publicly accessible policies. Actually, we'll be evaluating publicly accessible policies for a number of grantee institutions and provide assistance to those institutions constructively. We're also going to share results of those oversight efforts with the community, the research community, to improve and enhance compliance with the new regulation. We have a guide notice that provides additional detail regarding compliance oversight for FCOI. Questions regarding FCOI, we have a dedicated mailbox that's that you can send your questions to. That's fcoicompliance@mail.nih.gov. And OER also has a dedicated FCOI website. We're going to talk a bit more about some additional policy updates. The NIH recently published a revised grants policy statement that is effective October 1st of this year. It supersedes our previous version, the 2011 version. We intend to update the grants policy statement yearly, and we've been successful doing so the past couple of years. The revised grants policy statement, it incorporates various changes in statutes and regulations and policies that are already in place but may have undergone some changes. We have clarified certain policies, many times based upon input from the grantee community. So please, if you do have any questions, please utilize our grants policy email. And many times we can incorporate the responses to those questions into the next version of the grants policy statement. There's a link on your screen to the current version, the 2012 version of the grants policy statement, and a guide notice. Now we'll talk about the new HHS policy on conference grants. And it's important to note that this policy applies to grants and cooperative agreements that have as a primary purpose to support conference or scientific meetings. It modifies the use of NIH funds for conferences, meetings, food, promotional items, and printing and publications. If you have an award that provides conferences that are incidental to your award, those would not, this new policy would not apply. The implications for your grants, effective with your awards, any awards that were issued after January 27th of this year, a new term and condition has been placed in your award prohibiting food and meal costs from being supported or charged to NIH-supported conference grants, and they will be included on all competing and non-competing NIH R13 and U13 awards. The language is on your screen. Direct charges for meals, food, and beverages are unallowable charges to this project. Implications for your application. Applications that are coming due must comply with this new policy. Again, if your grant is not specifically to support conferences as a primary purpose, the policy does not apply. Now we're going to jump from conferences and food and drink to human subjects involvement on active awards. This is a reminder that if you do have a change in scope regarding human subjects, prior approval is required. from your institute, your awarding institute, and additional information is located in the GPS. Changes from the approved involvement of human subjects, it's an indicator of a change in scope. So if there's any question, please contact your IC and work out with them whether you need to submit a formal approval from your IC. We have additional guidance at Guide Notice NOTOD 12-129. It provides you information on how to submit your request for prior approval and the types of changes that require such approval. Staying with human subjects research, delayed onset human subject research. Sometimes research applications are submitted to NIH knowing that you'll use human subjects, but not necessarily know what the human subject involvement is going to be, and it can't be described in the application. So in your application, when you submit to the awarding IC a detailed human subject section prior to involvement of human subjects, the guide notice on your screen will clarifies for you the types of delayed onset awards and the process for submitting prior approval requests. Human embryonic stem cells. Impending changes to the PHS 398 and 424 instructions they acknowledge that the stem cell registry now lists more than 180 approved cell lines. So if you are going to submit an application that involves human embryonic stem cells, you must specify a cell line from the registry that will be used in the proposed research. Or if you can't, you must provide a strong justification as to why the stem cell line can't be chosen at this time from the registry, and you must certify that one will be used. And you must include that in your research strategy section of the application. Let's see. Okay, the Division of Receipt and Referral is now communicating with applicants via the ERA Commons. There's a new correspondence section of the Commons with a detailed status screen, and applicants will be notified by email to check your Commons account for information from the Division of Receipt and Referral. The NIH Forms and Applications page, we've recently updated it for progress reports, other post-award actions. There is a new location for final progress reports, instructions under closeout. There's more information at NIH Notice OD 12-152. And revised competing applications that were to be implemented or will be implemented in the summer of 2013 following development of applicable electronic forms. Foreign institutions. This is Emily's field of expertise. I'll do my best to attempt to walk through this. Payment for all foreign awards issued after October 1st of this year have transitioned to the payment management system. We have a guide notice on that as well, OD-12-139. The awards will use PMS-B subaccounts, and the transition affects carryover, whether or not the carryover authority is noted in the notice of award. If you carry over an unobligated balance from an award that was issued before October of 2012, then that date must be done with NIH assistance. For initial awards to foreign grantees issued after October 1st of this year, you must use the currency rate that's in effect at the time the funds are drawn down, as opposed to the time the application is submitted. For initial awards to foreign grantees that were issued after October 1st of this year under SNAP, FFR, expenditure data is required only at the end of a competitive segment. and this aligns foreign SNAP awards with our domestic SNAP awards. And I'm going to hand it over to Emily.
Alrighty, thank you, Scott. So we're not quite halfway done, but a little bit. I have quite a bit of information to share with you that's not on the slides on some of these topics. So I'm going to start with the Fed-wide streamlining efforts. And I have just hit the wrong thing. Okay, there we go. Sorry, I'm learning how to use the equipment. I'm going to start with the Research Performance Progress Report. This started back in 2004, coming out of the Research Business Models Subcommittee. And the aim of this effort was to standardize interim progress reporting across federal agencies that support research and research-related activities. OMB issued a final format for this and a directive to agencies to post a plan for RPPR implementation. Be aware that this is a format and not a form. So what it does is standardize the questions and the categories for agencies to use when asking questions in progress reports and interim progress reports, but it doesn't provide a specific form. NIH plans to implement the RPPR for all of our award mechanisms, so that's for research and training mechanisms. That means that it will eventually replace, the RPPR will replace the PHS 2590 and the PHS 416.9. The other thing that NIH plans to do is to implement this solely in an electronic format. And at the bottom of the slide here, you'll see some dates, and I'm not going to cover them here because I'm going to cover them in the next slide under the timeline. So you'll see here on the left-hand side of the slide, the RPPR NIH began it with a pilot with 7 institutions back in April of this year. We'd like to thank those 7 institutions. They were very, very helpful as we worked through the process of implementing the RPPR. They were able to provide us with some very valuable feedback, and we were able to implement some changes and work out some system bugs before we implemented the RPPR more broadly, which we did in June. In June of this year, we broadened the use of the RPPR module in the ERA Commons to all federal demonstration partnership institutions. So that was another 160 institutions that were using the RPPR. And then just earlier last month, so at the end of October, we broadened that access to the RPPR even more. So now all NIH grantees with fellowship awards and with SNAP awards have the option to use the RPPR when submitting a Type 5 progress report. Again, so that use of that is optional. You can decide on a case-by-case basis each award. Do you want to submit an RPPR, or would you rather submit an eSNAP? If it's a fellowship award, you would decide whether to submit a paper fellowship or an RPPR. There was an additional set of functionality that we released at that same time. It's called Progress Report Additional Materials. We will broaden this functionality in the future, but right now it's for use only with providing verification with the NIH public access policy and that you are in compliance with it. NIH does plan to mandate the use of RPPR for all SNAP awards and fellowship awards in the coming spring. So please be sure that you're looking for guide notices for that, because we will let you know in advance of that when we intend to mandate the use of the RPPR for those awards. One of the things that you haven't heard me mention yet are non-SNAP awards and when that will be included. So we are still in the process of developing the budget capabilities for those awards. So we have not determined the implementation date on that. We do intend to leverage some development of another project, which we will cover later in this presentation. So what's new about the progress report? Well, first of all, it's a standardized format to standardize things across all of those agencies supporting, federal agencies supporting research and research-related activities. Its format is a little bit different from eSNAP, but the information that we're requesting is actually very similar. We're just requesting it in different parts of the information that you're providing to us. The SNAP awards are still not going to require budgets, so for NIH, our SNAP awards don't require budgets now, nor will they when we implement the RPPR. When we implement the RPPR for non-SNAP awards, they will require budgets, and in accordance with that final format, they will have to use the SF424 budgets. One of the neat new features about the RPPR and publications is it's similar to what we're using eSNAP for with publications, and you log in and you'll see your publications and you can associate them with the award. In this case, however, the system will now identify whether or not that publication is in compliance with the NIH public access policy. So you'll see that right there on the screen when you're completing the RPPR, and you'll see it in the final PDF of the RPPR, which will also help our NIH staff when managing the review of publications and whether or not they're in compliance. We've included some live links within the RPPR module at appropriate questions to the notice of award. So this allows a PI or delegate who is completing the RPPR to go and look and see if there's special terms of award that need to be addressed within the progress report, or to see whether or not the award has carryover authority. We did, where possible, try to streamline the information we are collecting. So we did review all of the information that we're collecting and determine if we could eliminate any of that. So when we're requesting information on clinical trials, we've reduced that down to just the NCT number instead of the 5 data elements that we were getting previously. There is a dynamic display of questions in the RPPR, so let me just explain a little bit what I mean by dynamic display. So the majority of the questions on the RPPR are going to be asked of all of our awards, so 95% of the questions are going to be asked for all awards. But depending on the mechanism, there's some information that we may need for some mechanisms, but we don't need for other mechanisms. For example, for training awards, we need to know about the research, about the RCR plan. So for those awards, we'll ask for that information. But for an R01 award, for example, we would not ask for that information. And that, the system is aware of that and has been programmed to display the questions appropriate to the mechanism. So I said that there's not that much difference about the RPPR from what you're used to submitting to us in your PHS 2590, but there are some differences. The main difference that you'll see is a new data collection for foreign information. So this is 3 different data collections. One of them is requesting information on foreign components, one on the dollars spent in foreign countries, and then lastly, if an individual that you're reporting, for example, under personnel, has an affiliation with a foreign institution. Probably the single biggest change that we've gotten questions on, and I think that it will take some time for everybody to wrap their brains around, the person months requested for personnel must be rounded to the whole person month. So this is language coming to us directly from that OMB approved RPPR final format. So in other words, if an individual has 1.6 person months effort, you would round that up to 2. There are instances, though we would consider them to be rare, where, for example, a PDPI has effort of 0.1 person months or less, in which case you would round down to 0. And the system will accommodate that. Throughout the RPPR, we've provided help files. This is certainly one that we've provided help files on. We have also written up all of that information in the NIH RPPR instruction guide. So if you have questions about this, they've probably already been answered in there. And if you don't, we are currently working on, if you don't find your answers there, we're currently working on questions for frequently asked questions and answers so that those answers are easily accessible to all grantees. Other support will now only be required if there's a change, so that was true of our SNAP awards, but when we broaden this to non-SNAP awards, it's going to be true for those as well. And lastly, it clarifies when a progress report should be used for prior approval. It does this by explicitly saying on the award screen that this request constitutes prior approval. And the only instance in which it's appropriate to do that is in a reduction of the level of effort for the PD, PI, or senior key personnel listed on the notice of award. So that's a reduction of effort of 25% or greater. So that was a whole lot of information, I know, on the RPPR. It was many years in the making, and I personally have been working on it for the past 3 years. So I can answer many questions that you would have about that, but that also means that we've produced quite a number of materials as resources for you. This page will lead you to that. So this is the RPPR page at NIH, and it includes information on the background of why the RPPR was developed, the NIH instruction guide that I mentioned earlier, the screenshots of the ERA module. There's also an archive of a training webinar, so a webinar similar to this one, just without video, but that walks grantees through the whole process. We do a demo of the RPPR module and how to use it and highlight the differences in much greater detail than we did here. So hopefully you will find that helpful. We did receive a lot of positive feedback. So if you haven't seen it or you know staff that haven't seen it, I would suggest that you go there and find the archive of that training webinar. You'll also find relevant guide notices listed there. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears from the RPPR and go to some policy reminders. So a little bit on the Transparency Act, and I'm not really going to go into this slide in any great detail. I know that as grantees, you guys have been responsible for and aware of FFATA reporting requirements for the last 2 years, so you probably know this even better than we do. So since 2011, you've been required to, the FFATA requirements have applied to Type 1 awards. And then beginning last year in fiscal year 2012, this included not only Type 1 awards, but any awards that followed those. So any Type 5 coming after a Type 1 that had been issued in 2011 or beyond. We do have some frequently asked questions about this one, about what is subject to FFATA reporting and what is not. One of the things that we've changed recently is to include Type 7s in that list. Please note that this is Type 7s that follow Type 1s that were required to report under FFATA. So if it's a Type 7 on an award that wasn't required to report under FFATA, then it would not be subject to the FFATA requirements. However, if the previous award was subject to FFATA requirements, then the Type 7 would be also. Another thing that we've done to try to help clarify that a little bit for you is to change the FFATA terms that we placed on the award. Originally, I think they were a little bit vague, so beginning last year, what we did was put a more definitive yes-no term on there. So there is a term that very clearly states if it is not subject to FFATA reporting requirements. And then there's another term that I like to call the FFATA likely term, which doesn't clearly indicate that FFATA requirements apply, but that they most likely apply, and then it sends you to a website to help you determine whether or not FFATA reporting requirements apply. But generally they do when you see that term. So here is some FFATA information for you. So this is the NIH FFATA page. And I'd just like to highlight here, if you have questions about FFATA reporting requirements, you can send those NIH-specific questions to the grants policy inbox, and so that's grantspolicy@mail.nih.gov. We've gotten a whole lot of questions on this one. So what we've done here is taken the time to kind of walk you through how you would troubleshoot or what you would do if you log into FSRS and you can't find this award for which you think FFATA reporting applies. So the first thing that I would do is review it and make sure that this is indeed subject to FFATA reporting requirements. That term of award that I just discussed on the previous slide is a great way to do that. Otherwise, you can go back through the whole process and determine, was the original award, the original Type 1 award issued on or after October 1st of 2010, in which case FFATA requirements would apply. So let's say you've done that and you know that FFATA reporting requirements do apply. The next thing that you would do is make sure that you're using the appropriate FAIN. So remember that the FAIN number does not use all of the NIH grant number, and it's actually just a shortened version of that. So for us, what you would do is drop that leading type, the 1, and then the suffix that shows the support year and any other identifiers in the support year. So it's just really that middle part with the activity code, the IC, and the serial number, and that's what you'll use for the FAIN. So once you have the FAIN and you've used that, what you're going to do is go search in USA Spending using that FAIN. If your award is listed in usaspending.gov using that FAIN, then the information should also appear in FSRS. It means that NIH has successfully transmitted that information up and it's working its way through the government, and the disconnect is between USA Spending and FSRS. So if it does not show up, if it's showing up in USA Spending but not in FSRS, what you would do is take that that URL from USA Spending and contact the Federal Service Desk to have the record added to FSRS, and they're usually able to, with that USA Spending URL, correct the problem. So we're going to switch gears a little bit here and talk about electronic submission at NIH. And actually, before we do that, this one's not quite related to electronic submission. This is actually a tool that I think most program directors or principal investigators would be interested in. This helps them search, it's a search feature called Like This that helps them search for other studies that have been supported at NIH that are similar to their field of interest, and it uses a couple of different algorithms and information that we have on the PI and the research that we've supported for them already, and they can log in to the ERI Commons and use this feature and find other work that we've supported in the same area. And for more information on this, go to the URL at the bottom of the slide. So that brings me back to the title slide here, which is electronic submission at NIH. We have, for many years, been dedicated to expanding electronic submission to all of our applications. We've certainly been concentrated on increasing electronic support of other interactions with NIH post-award, so for example with the just-in-time process or with the no-cost extension process. So the next in line for those initiatives that we're working on for electronic submission is complex applications. This is the last little bit of the applications. I believe we're at over 94% of our applications coming in electronically through grants.gov anyway, so we're just trying to get at that last 6%. We've recently issued a guide notice on this, and we will begin to transition these complex applications to electronic submission beginning in January of 2013, and hoping to transition all of the applications over by January of the following year. This will use a module kind of outside ERA, but it will act as an interface for grantees to be able to manage their grant application. For those grantees that have system-to-system submission, they would still be able to submit their application straight to grants.gov. So this should support both institutions with system to system and those without. And for more information on this, see the guide notice highlighted here. So the next of these initiatives is an electronic administrative supplements initiative. So this one actually began back in February of this year. We hope that some of you guys have already used it and have had positive experiences in doing so. So what this is an open pilot for grantees to submit requests for administrative supplements either through the ERA Commons or through grants.gov. And you might ask why we decided to develop it that way. We did a lot of polling with grantees before we decided to go forward for this project. So those grantees that have system-to-system submission capabilities really like the idea of using grants.gov. And those that don't really like the idea of having a very simple interface in the ERA Commons, especially if they're not requesting much in the administrative supplement, for example, just a piece of equipment. Instead of having to fill out a whole application, they can just submit out a brief amount of information, and we can capitalize on the information that we already have on that award in our systems. So that's what we've done. There is a parent FOA that needs to be used for submission of these. In fact, there's a couple of parent FOAs. There's one parent FOA that kind of covers everything broadly, and then there's some more specific ones, for example, for some of the diversity and re-entry supplements, and you'll find those on the NIH Guide for Grants and Contracts. So the next of these initiatives is electronic post-award change of a grantee institution. So similar to the Type 3s, this is a project that happens post-award. It's also an open pilot, so any grantee institution is able to use this if they choose to do so. If they choose to do it under the traditional methods for the time being, that's also fine. So it's for the Type 7s, change of grantee institutions, it's available only if the electronic activity code has transitioned to electronic submission. But as I said in the previous slide, 96% of our awards are coming in through electronic submission, so this supports the submission of most of those applications electronically. There's also a parent FOA for this one. There's a single parent FOA regardless of the mechanism. So when you open that FOA, you need to then identify your mechanism to make sure you're selecting the appropriate package to submit in response to that. And again, I do want to highlight that this is post-award changes only. We are very interested in supporting the same sort of process for pre-award, but it's a separate project that we're looking at. So everything that works for those Type 7s, for those change of grantee institutions, when we develop that, also works for our Type 6s, which are successor and interest applications. So the same thing would be true if a grantee decides to submit an electronic application. It would need to be post-award, and the activity codes would have needed to have transitioned to electronic submission, and it's open to any grantee. The only difference is with the Type 6s, we actually need less information than we need with the Type 7s. The Type 7s require a full application package. The Type 6s require a modified application package. All of this information is detailed in the guide notice and also in the parent FOA. And there is, again, a separate FOA specifically for Type 6s that you will find on the NIH Guide for Grants and Contracts. And lastly, the third prong of the change of institution and change of organizational status effort for electronic submission is the electronic submission of relinquishing statements. So again, it's open to any grantee that chooses to use it. It's basically an electronic version of the PHS 3734, which is the relinquishing statement. It's in a new ERA module called the Change of Institution module. This actually does not require that the activity code has transitioned to electronic submission. So for any grantee post-award that chooses to do so, they can submit their information electronically through ERA. One of the benefits for doing that is that the system will validate the amount of funds that are being relinquished on that award. And if you remember that the grantee cannot relinquish more funds than they got for that current award. So the relinquished amount should not include carryover, which it often does. So that's one of the most common mistakes that we saw on relinquishing statements, and we often had to go back and forth with the relinquishing grantee to get that corrected. What the system does now is validate that as it's coming in, so it helps actually cut down the amount of information and amount of back and forth that we have to get a correct relinquishing statement in. And one of the other things that it does, it reduces just slightly, but it does reduce the amount of information that we need coming in. So we've eliminated 2 of the data collection items on that. So just in time, so this is another one of those electronic initiatives for communicating better with grantees. As you know, there were some changes recently, I think back in April, to the just in time. We opened the link more broadly, basically decoupling it from the impact score and the priority score. If you notice that there are any problems, if you have a grant and you expect for there to be a just-in-time link and it's not there, we encourage you to contact the NIH help desk or the ERA help desk for that, and they'll be able to assist you in rectifying that. The other thing that we did was modify the e-notifications and basically tightened up the priority scores for which those e-notifications are sent. So now they're sent a little bit less broadly than they had been. And lastly, and probably most importantly, in a certain sense, is we mandated the use of that. So now if you're submitting just-in-time information, you need to be using the ERA Commons to do that and be submitting it electronically. Here are some tips for success, and I'm sure that you guys as universities are already registered with the NIH Commons and with grants.gov. So what I'll highlight here is a reminder about keeping your Central Contractor Registry or CCR information current. You only need to do this once every 12 months, but the reason it is so important is under FFATA, not only do you have to have a current CCR registration at the time of application, which we do check when those are coming in through grants.gov, you also have to have a current CCR registration at the time of award. So if you're not checking those frequently, it could lapse in the meantime. So even if you've checked it before you've submitted the application, you need to be sure that you're going back and checking it to make sure that it's active at the time of award. And just some last slides finishing up here with some helpful contact information and who to contact under kind of what situation. So if you have general application questions, those would go to grants info. If you have grants.gov questions, those are going to go to the grants.gov email included here. And lastly, if you have questions for the about ERA, you would contact the ERA Commons Help Desk. If you have questions about grants policy, you would contact the grants policy mailbox at NIH. And that's a mailbox that's manned by myself and by Scott and by other individuals in the Division of Grants Policy. Similarly, our sister office also has an email, so if you have questions regarding compliance issues, you would send those to the Division of Grants Compliance and Oversight, and you see their contact information here. And I'm going to leave those up as I scoot over and get ready to take some questions.
Thank you, Scott and Emily. If you have a question that you would like Scott and Emily to address, please send it to federalupdate@missouri.edu. Again, that email address is federalupdate@missouri.edu. Okay, we do have one question in. Can you tell us what the NIH is planning in regards to sequestration in January?
Try that.
I can tell you that I certainly haven't, I would not be able to address that, what the plans are. I'm sure there are people that are much higher up than I am that are working on that and thinking about that now, but it is not something that's come down to the level where we are.
Thank you. Again, if you have a question, feel free to send it to federalupdate@missouri.edu. Here's a question for Emily. Can the results from the RPPR to terminate a grant because of less than expected performance? Have performance metrics been discussed, and if so, can you share any information about that?
So I would say that the RPPR isn't intended to change our metrics in that regard anyway. We are going to be reviewing the information that's submitted in that progress report, just as we would be reviewing anything in your PHS 2590 now. It's just that the format's going to look a little bit different, but the information is basically going to be the same.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, if you have questions, please send them to federalupdate@missouri.edu. We have a number of small colleges watching today. One of the questions is, are you seeing any negative impacts on the number of small college applications as a result of the recent changes in conflict of interest?
I'm not aware of any. That may be a question you'd want to direct to our sister division, the Division of Grants Compliance and Oversight. They would be a lot more knowledgeable about those, about that data than we would.
May actually be too soon. It's fairly recent changes.
It is.
Yeah, it is. It is very recent.
Again, are there any questions for Emily and Scott? Please send them to federalupdate@missouri.edu.
We can certainly tell you that if you do have questions, again, you found our contact information in the slide deck. So if you have questions that come to you later, Scott and I are both happy to answer them. You can probably find us if you search for us. I'm sure we're out there. If you want to ask us a question directly, and if not, you can certainly use that grants policy inbox. And like I said, both Scott and I man that.
Thank you. We did get one other question in. We're having a little bit of lag on the email. Would you elaborate on the types of costs that are allowed when submitting electronic administrative supplements?
So for the electronic administrative supplements, again, it's not really a change in the supplements or the supplement process. What we're basically trying to do there is support what we have done for years, anywhere where you have requested supplemental costs. So we're just supporting that electronically. So the process that it's electronic doesn't change, certainly the policy. I can tell you as a grants management specialist, many of the things that I saw as requested costs were costs for equipment, for example. Maybe there was broken equipment in the lab and it was an unexpected cost, costs for additional personnel, that kind of thing. And then certainly it would be used, I think, very heavily for those diversity and re-entry supplements. So those were supplements we were getting in on paper anyway, and this just supports the electronic submission of that information.
Thank you. Is there any plan to have no-cost extensions submitted electronically?
We currently accept your first no-cost extension request electronically. And whether additional requests will be submitted electronically, I'm not exactly sure about the timing of that, but that will also be required to be done electronically. As Emily said, we're trying to move toward a more electronic system in general, as far as your pre-award and awarding and post-award process.
And that no-cost extension one was one that became a requirement recently, so a little bit earlier than the just-in-time, but it's mandated for the use of your request for a first no-cost extension.
Okay. Again, if you have a question for Scott or Emily, please send it to federalupdate@missouri.edu. Question here about the FOA. Is the FOA for change of grantee applications active now, and are we able to use it?
So yes, the FOA for the change of grantee institution is active now. There's a guide notice out, and I think that went active maybe the end of August or beginning of September. I should take this opportunity to let you know that if you, as the new institution that would be receiving that award, choose to submit that electronically, that's fine. The other institution does not also have to have chosen to submit their relinquishing statement electronically. So either way that it goes, one institution can submit electronically and one can submit on paper, or you can both submit electronically. It's an open pilot. We certainly encourage you to use it and to get some feedback on it. And then once we have a little bit more feedback on it, we'll consider mandating the use of it once we know it's working well.
Thank you. Again, if you have questions, send them to federalupdate@missouri.edu. Another question about the FOA. What was the general parent FOA given on the electronic submission slide regarding administrative supplements?
So, and I'm going to just try to go back here a little bit so that you can maybe see that. So can you repeat the question? I think it was the FOA for...
The general parent FOA.
So that parent FOA number is PA 12270. And generally, if I want to go to the parent FOAs, I can tell you I go to the NIH Guide for Grants and Contracts, and then you can click on just the parent FOA link. If you scroll down all the way to the bottom of that, you're going to find the whole bunch of these things that I just talked about. You're going to find the FOA for the electronic supplements. You're going to find the FOA for the change of grantee organizational status, and you will find the one for the Type 7s, the grantee organization.
Thank you. This question is about the PubMed compliance issue. Says, I have not had an opportunity to use the progress report additional materials yet, but will this make compliance with PubMed easier?
So I think that there's a couple of things. I think that definitely the compliance with the policy will be made easier, first of all, because in the RPPR we're going to display what the compliance status is. For example, it's not applicable to this publication, or it is applicable in process compliant. So all of that information is going to be available to investigators. We've also made a big effort recently to supply the institutions with some more tools. So now there will be reporting capabilities for institutions to go look at that and see whether or not publications are in compliance. We are aware that progress reports will come in that have publications that are not in compliance, though the system is automatically going to send you a warning. You're going to know that immediately upon submitting your RPPR. We're going to give you a brief window of time from 4 to 6 weeks to correct that if you choose to, and that is when you would use that progress report additional materials to clarify and then verify your compliance with the public access policy. So we do hope that the changes that we have made will make it easier for you as grantees to know whether you're compliant and what you need to do, and for us to monitor that.
Thank you. Again, if you have a question, please send it to federalupdate@missouri.edu. This is about the just-in-time information. Should the just-in-time information be submitted solely based upon the receipt of the automated email, or is the purpose of the automated email to indicate that the PI should prepare the just-in-time information so that it is ready when the NIH staff requests it?
So this is a good question. This is a question that we get all the time. As you can imagine, it's hard for us. NIH is a big place, and everybody kind of has a different pay line depending on the IC. There's 24 funding ICs, and so it's kind of hard to define a generic line where we would send out that request, but that's what we do with that automated email. So you can certainly consider that. It's never an indication, particularly of funding. I would certainly pay attention to a just-in-time request that's coming directly from your IC. But in general, it's kind of a guide, and we're going to put it out there. If you choose to submit it in response to the automated email, that's fine.
Okay, any last questions for Scott and Emily? Please send them to federalupdate@missouri.edu. And again, as always, if for some reason a question comes in later or you think of something in the next few days, please feel free to send it to us, and we can make sure that it gets to Scott and Emily. I just want to also let the audience know that Dr. Rocky's presentation was canceled as a result of Hurricane Sandy, and we were not able to reschedule her, but we will work with her office to make sure that her slides are available for you to view in the next few days. Do have another question that has come in. New procedure, the new procedure, it's on the new procedures for rounding effort on progress reports. We're required to submit on all personnel 1 calendar month or more, but if the individual is key, but at 0.4 or 3%, well, we need to include these individuals. We've had questions from NIH GMS on this, even though it's not in line with the 1 calendar month requirement.
Okay, so I would say, I said this is absolutely the subject when we were introducing the RPPR that we've gotten the most questions about. So I'm absolutely ready to talk about this. There's a couple of different things that are going on. The instructions are actually no different than the instructions that are currently in the eSNAP. You're correct. If it is 1 person month or greater, that's when you're going to include that individual. The only time that you would include an individual that doesn't have 1 person month or greater is if it's the PDPI. So the PDPI we always need to have on the all personnel report. I mean, they're kind of the guys driving it, so we need them there. And in some instances, they may have less than 1 whole person month. For those in the RPPR, you're going to round them. If they're at 0.5, you'd round them up to 1. If they're at 0.4, you're going to round them down to 0. And like I said, we did provide examples of this in the help files for the RPPR. I think that both grantees and NIH staff have been confused to some degree about the senior key issue and whether or not they need to be included. And some of the confusion comes from senior key coming in on an application, or senior key as you identify at the institution. And then for the reduction in level of effort, it's the PDPI and senior key personnel named on the notice of grant award. So it's kind of the same phrase that's used a little bit differently. On the all personnel report, we're really just looking for those individuals based on effort. So if they're not senior key, they'll be on there. If they are senior key, they're not the PDPI, and they have less than 1 person month, they're not going to be on that all personnel report. So that's a little bit of a change. One of the things that we are allowing you guys to do, and we're changing actually in the RPPR, we used to have a senior key indicator on our old all personnel report. That indicator is back by popular demand, both from grantees and NIH staff. So hopefully that will help to some degree. I think it will be a little bit of an educational issue. We certainly highlighted this in training for NIH staff. So I had mentioned that we did training for grantees a couple of weeks ago on the RPPR. We also did training in-house for NIH staff. So we hope that that gets out there and gets a little bit corrected, but that is one that I can tell you will absolutely be reflected in the frequently asked questions when we write them and post them. So it's a great question.
Thank you. Again, we have time for one last question for Scott and Emily. federalupdate@missouri.edu. And as always, if for some reason we don't get to your question, we will make sure that we get the question to them for their answers. Are there any last questions? Just want to say thank you again very much. Appreciate you coming, and our next speaker will be coming up at the bottom of the hour.
Righty, thank you.
Thank you very much.